Hello, welcome to the Scottish Summit 2021. My name is David E. Patrick. This is my talk, Intro to Dataverse and Power Automate. I first like to thank our sponsors. Without these folks, this talk wouldn't be possible, this conference wouldn't be possible, so we really appreciate their support. I'd like to thank ScriptRunner, the #1 for PowerShell management, DQ Global, driving data quality, Proximo 3, Microsoft Consulting Specialists, RedSpire, Agilysys, and Hitachi Solutions. Again, thanks for their support for making this possible. So, my name's Dave Patrick, and I work for Data Systems Analysts. I'm a subject matter expert. That's a fancy way of saying that I do everything. I wear all the hats. I'm a SharePoint administrator, SharePoint developer, SharePoint trainer. I'm also a Microsoft MVP. I teach over at the University of Maryland. Go Terps! I'm an adjunct professor, and I teach intro to computer programming. We do some database classes. I've been a Microsoft certified trainer since 2001, so I'm coming up on 20 years of doing that. I also have a lot of certifications, so if anyone's interested in certification, please reach out to me. Tweet me at David E. Patrick. I've got the MCSE Data, MCSE Productivity, MCSD SharePoint apps, web apps. If anyone's looking for a job, check out our URL, tinyurl.com/DSA job. We're always looking for good people. So, as I mentioned, this is my talk, Intro to CDS, no wait, Dataflow Prex, no wait, that's not right, Dataverse. Inside of, nope, not Microsoft Flow, Power Automate. So there's been a few renames along the way that I've been doing this talk. And I kind of make fun of it, but I point this out because when you're going through some of the documentation, like we'll be doing during this talk, you'll see some references to the old terms and technologies. So I want to make everyone aware that there has been a few renamings as we go along. So what do I want you to get a walk away with from this talk? Three things. Number one, what is Dataverse? So I want you to be able to understand what it is, be able to explain it to the others, get a kind of a good grasp of what you can do with it. And then number two, why would you want to use it? How is it beneficial? What are the pros? What are the cons? Finally, how can you use it with something like Flow inside Power Automate? So, if I wanted to say move data from my CRM app into something else like SharePoint, how could we do that? And that's exactly what we're going to show you how to do. So starting off with where it came from. So it used to be called the Common Data Services. This is important because you'll see when we do some of the demos that some things are still called CDS and stood for Common Data Service. And for a hot second there, it was called Microsoft Data Flex Pro. But we've renamed it, so now it's Dataverse. Everything's Microsoft Data. Well, not everything, but most things have been renamed to Dataverse. And if you go out there and you click on that link, you'll get information all about it. And we'll do that in just a second. What is it? It's part of the Microsoft Power Platform. This is this cloud-based platform that it's either no code or low code, and it helps us to get Office 365 applications communicating with Azure and Dynamics 365 and your own standalone applications. So some of the tools in this tool belt, you've got Power BI, which is your business analytics, that's reporting, that's those dashboards and charts and KPIs, key performance indicators, all that good stuff that you're used to seeing when you're doing business intelligence type applications. There's Power Apps, that's for no code, low code application development in the cloud. And we're going to be doing some of that where we show you how we can edit the data and move the data. Power Automate for process automation. That's where we're saying, hey, we want something to kick off based when some event that happens. We want to automate some process. And then this last one's kind of newish. The Power Virtual Agents. These are these intelligent virtual agents that you can build with a graphical user interface. Now, underlying all these tools, you've got different data connectors to connect to different data sources, and we'll demo a couple of those when we do our demo. There's access to artificial intelligence builders to add AI into your applications and processes. And then finally, what we're talking about today is Dataverse, that central database for storing our data and reading it, updating it, deleting it, everything we need to do working with data. So this is Microsoft Learn. This is the documentation. And a lot of times when I tell some of my developers, I work with a bunch of developers, and I say, hey, read the documentation, they got to laugh at me. And they're like, Dave, I don't want to read documentation. Documentation's boring. Microsoft Learn is anything but boring documentation. It's not just good documentation, but it's also tutorials and sandboxes, hands-on labs, certification preparation, Microsoft has done a fantastic job with their Microsoft Learn site and the documentation that surrounds all their products. So here it is. We're looking at the documentation on what is Microsoft Dataverse, and it doesn't hide anything. It tells you right up front that it has been renamed, so we know that right up front. And then it comes up with a quick explanation that Dataverse really is a place to let you securely store and manage your data by all your business applications. We store that data in a set of tables. We used to call that entities, and we might still see that here and there. What is this table/entity? It's a set of rows and columns, and we used to call those records, and the columns we called fields or attributes. And if you're an old database person, I used to be a SQL DBA for about 10 years. That was the kind of technology we used to use. We talked about tuples and rows and fields and attributes and entities and ER diagrams and all that. So you might be comfortable with that. But if you're not, we're just talking about different types of data, right? Names, ages, salaries, all those are fields in a table that might be like the employees or the customers or whatever entities or tables that you're keeping track of. That's what Dataverse is. It's a single place where we can store all our data so it's accessible by everyone and all the other applications. Here's an example of what it might look like. This is accessing Dataverse, and there's different ways you can access the data in the Dataverse. This particular one is through the Power Apps portal. So I logged into Power Apps and I clicked over on the left-hand side navigation on data. And when that opens up, and this is a slightly older screenshot because this is still referring to them as entities, but I'll go out and show you in the demo in a minute. It's now called tables. But you can see that there's different out-of-the-box entities like accounts, actions, activities, addresses, a whole bunch of different entities that you can track or tables that you can track as part of your database. There's things like option sets to keep track of different options that each attribute can be a value of. There's connections, all sorts of good stuff. Once you click on one of these entities, in this example, I clicked on the account table/entity, you see the fields that are, the columns. So this particular entity or table has account name, which is the primary key, I call it primary key, primary field. It's the unique identifier for this entity, the account number, account rating. There's a couple different addresses. So this is that metadata, the data about data. Things like it's going to have an account number and it's going to be text and it's going to be optional. It also has an account name when that's required. All this is data about data. If I click on this little tab here, this would actually take me to the live raw data. I'm going to do that in just a second. So why would we use Dataverse? So besides the fact that it's centrally located, it's also very easy to manage because it is centrally located. Both that metadata I just talked about and the actual data are stored in the cloud. You don't need to go install SQL Server, worry about the operating system, what version it's on and all that. It's all centrally located and all those details are abstracted from the end user. It's also, because it's central, it's easy to secure. So we use role-based security. We'll put people, you grant them different roles. They can be reader, they can be read writer, they can be full control, and then that allows them to determine what access they're going to have to the different tables. You can have easy access to if you're using Dynamics 365. So if you're using the customer relationship management module or inventory or finance or whatever, all that data is in the Dataverse, and it makes it very easy to get access to it using Power Apps or whatever tools you want to use to get at that data. There's rich metadata. So we talked about the metadata and the fact that you can have different data types like strings and integers and choices and things like that. You can also have relationships between the entities. So we'll talk about some of that when we get into the demo. The last reason why you should use Dataverse is it's got built-in capability for logic and validation. So you may have heard the term garbage in, garbage out. We want to prevent that, right? We don't want people entering in bad addresses or duplicate account numbers or duplicate customer numbers. We can, in Dataverse, very easily apply different rules to prevent, look for duplicates or prevent, correct an address if it's not been a correct address. So these are all great reasons. Oh, and I skipped the last one, the productivity tools. So there's a bunch of different tools. You can go in the browser using the Power Apps portal and get to the Dataverse. There's tools through Microsoft Teams to access the Dataverse. There's even tools like an add-in for Microsoft Excel, and I'll actually show you that you can use. And people love this one, by the way, because there's so many folks that know how to use Excel already. It really reduces the learning curve and increases the adaptability of this new technology, the Dataverse. Because if they can use familiar tools to work with it, then they're on board and they're happy to use those, use what they already know. So before we get into actually creating an automated flow using the Microsoft Dataverse, let me just show you a little bit more about the Dataverse. So let's jump out here to our browser, and I don't have my browser open, so let's open a browser. Good old Edge. And let's go to the Power Apps portal, powerapps.com. And I'm going to log in. It is Office 365 based, so I've got to log in with one of my Office 365 identities. I actually have several. I'm going to use the one that's associated with my user group. I run a user group called MAD SharePoint. It stands for Mid-Atlantic Developers. It also doubles for the fact that sometimes SharePoint delights us and we're mad about it, and other times SharePoint makes us mad and we're not happy with it. Anyway, so this is my MAD SharePoint identity in Office 365, and in that tenant, I have access to Dataverse. I can click here on Data, click on my tables, and I'll see a bunch of the tables which were previously called entities listed. And there's standard entities that come out of the box with your with a standard database. Then you can also have custom entities, so you can create your own custom entities if you want. I'll show you that in a minute. While you're looking at any of these entities or tables, you can click on any one of them, and then you can see some of that other metadata I talked about, the different columns, any existing relationships, any business rules that might have been created, different views, different forms, different dashboards, charts, keys, and then the final tab is the data where you can actually see the data. So you see I've got some data in here. It's really easy to add a row, right? I can click add a record. Maybe I've got a new account that I'm working with from my MAD SharePoint company. Maybe I'm working with the ZZZ company. I can quickly add that. I only need to add in the required fields, and it looks like there's only one required field as noted by the asterisk. So I'll go ahead and save and close that. And now I've got a new account in my database. Now, what can typically happen is people can say, hey, Dave, I want you to develop, I've got some SharePoint users. They don't have access to Dynamic CRM. Dynamic CRM does require a license, and those licenses cost money. So I want to hand them out judiciously. Maybe I've got some users who just use SharePoint, but they'd like to be notified whenever someone adds a new account. Is there a way that I could come up with a solution to provide that? And the answer is yes. I could create a flow that whenever someone adds a new account, I'm going to go copy that data into a SharePoint list so my SharePoint users can see it without having to go into Dynamics CRM to see the data, or Power Apps, or wherever they want to see the data. They can just see it right from SharePoint. So that's the scenario that I want to kind of walk through and show you guys how you might do that. Before I do that, I do want to switch. So this is my production environment, right? My default, notice that here it says environment, default, MAD SharePoint. So this is, in theory, that my data that my whole company is working with. Power Apps has this concept of a developer's environment. So when you sign up for the Power Apps community plan, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, you can get access to your own environment within Power Apps and within Dataverse that is separate from production. That way, if I can play around with data, I'm not going to hurt anybody else. I'm isolated. Anything I do here is going to be separate from the production environment, and that's a good thing. So I'm going to switch to my development environment and show you how I would work. It even says right there, this is an individual environment, not meant for production use. Okay, so when I go to that data and click on tables, you'll notice the data is different. So because this is my production environment, I'll go to accounts. It looks the same. Actually, if I'm looking at the metadata, the list of entities, I've got some of the same standard ones, but I do have some custom ones. I've got dogs. That was a custom one. I added pet was another custom one. So there are some custom ones that I've added to this one. But in addition to the metadata being somewhat different than what's out in production, if I actually look at the data, so let's go and edit the data here. Let's click on that and edit the data. you'll notice the data. So before I had what ABC and ZZZ and all that, this is a whole different set of data. And this data came from when you load your development account, there's an option to say load sample data. And I took advantage of that because I didn't want to start with a blank slate. I wanted to have some data to play with as I'm coming up with solutions that I'm going to distribute. So this one just has, this is Microsoft AdventureWorks type data. Um, so using this data, I can go ahead and try out and plan that data flow that someone requested from me. The idea that when someone adds a new account here, I want it to show up in a SharePoint list. I can start doing that, testing it out in my development environment. So let's do that. Let's go to flows and let's do a new flow that will say, hey, based on when a new account gets created, let's add an item to a SharePoint list. And I did this earlier just as practice. So I'm going to turn this one off. This is the one I did earlier. So let's turn that guy off. We don't want that guy interrupting with what we're going to do now. You can see I've actually done this in the past. I've given this talk a few times, so there's other ones that are all off. And I guess I could even delete some of these. Let's see if we delete one of these. Clean this up a little bit. So you can delete flows, you can save flows, you can make copies of flows. Right now, these are all my cloud flows. There's other types of flows as well, but we'll just stick with this one for the moment. What we want to do is we want to create a flow, like I said, that when someone creates a new account in the Dataverse, typically through Dynamics CRM, but however, they could do it through Power Apps, they could do it through working with the data in an Excel spreadsheet. However they do that, I want to take that new account and show it on a SharePoint list so that my SharePoint people can get notified of new accounts without having to log into Dynamics CRM. That's the scenario. So we're going to go and we're going to say we're going to do a new flow. Now you'll see there's a couple different options. You can start from a template. You can build your own from a blank. You can do automated flow, instant flow, schedule flows, desktop flows, business process flows. Let's keep it simple. We're going to do an automated flow. Before I do that, I will show you some of the templates that are out there. The templates are helpful because they start with data connectors already. So if you know you're going to do a Power Apps button, a button on a Power Apps form, it's going to have a connector to the Power Apps and settings for a button. If you're working with SharePoint, you might have a SharePoint connector and Microsoft Outlook, because it looks like this one's sending an email. So these templates just get you, when you create one of these templates, let's actually show you one if I can. You'll see that there's already some of the connectors created for me, some of the triggers and the actions. So that's what we see in this flow. So we've already got a data connector to Power Apps, a trigger, an action to create an item in SharePoint, and then another action to send an email in Outlook. And then now all we need to do is start putting in some of these properties. What's the site address that we're targeting to create the item? What's the list name? Who are we sending the email to, et cetera, et cetera. So you can even see that because I haven't filled some of these points in, the flow checker's hollering at me and saying, hey, you've got to go fill in site address. You got to fill in list name. So the flow checker's there to kind of help you, guide you, and make sure you filled out the right information if you haven't. So we're not going to create this one. We're going to start one from blank. So we're going to go ahead and get out of that. Let's do a new, not use a template, just automated cloud flow. So we're going to call this demo new account notification. If I could spell, there we go. Because I'm doing it from a blank, I've got to figure out what's going to be the trigger, right? So is this going to be, based on someone clicking a button, based on a new account being created? We actually said we wanted this whenever a new account gets created. So we got to go figure out in Dataverse, where are those triggers? There's a lot of triggers. If I scroll down through here, you'll see, there's triggers for when a new email arrives in Gmail, Azure DevApps, Google Calendar, just tons and tons of different triggers. So one way to easily sort this is just to put words in there to sort on what you're looking for. So if I was looking for something in SharePoint, now I only see SharePoint triggers. But I'm not. I'm looking for something in Dataverse, right? So I want to see when a new account gets created in Dataverse, what are the triggers? Whoa, what happened there? There's no matches found. This is because not everything has been renamed yet. And this is why I explained that there's, what it used to be called. So if you put in common data service, now you're going to get some of those triggers that are really for Dataverse. And here's one that is going to be triggered whenever a row gets created, updated, deleted. We don't need all that. We just want when a new account gets created. So let's see, how about when a record's deleted, updated? Here we go. When a record is created in common data service, which we know is Dataverse, that's what we're looking for. So that's what we want to do to be our trigger. So we'll go ahead and create that. Then the next step is to say, okay, you're going to create this flow against an environment. Well, which one? Well, remember, I said I was working in my development environment. So make sure you want, as you're running your testing, you want to make sure you choose the same environment that you're targeting. So we're going to make this my development environment. We can go back later once we're happy with it and switch it back, but we're going to go start with the Dave Patrick environment. That's just my development environment. The next thing it asks for is the entity, right? And again, this is an example where they haven't quite updated this. So this, now it's table, but it used to say entity. So we just have to know that entity means table. So what's the table that we want? We want the accounts right at the top. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and select that. Finally, it says, what kind of scope do you want? And so this is just, do I want to limit this to a certain business unit, maybe HR or IT? Do I want to limit it to maybe a sub business unit, maybe a single user? No, I want this one, I don't care who does the account. So I'm going to open this up to the whole organization, and that's what I'm going to pick. All right, so I filled in my flow checker, no problems, feels good. Next step is I'm going to add an action. So I've filled out the trigger. Now, what do I want to happen when that trigger gets executed? I need to do an action. And just like when we sort it on the triggers, we need to sort on the actions because there's a lot of different actions. There's mail actions, AI builder actions, common data service actions. But in this case, we said we wanted to create a new item in a SharePoint list. So we're going to say SharePoint, and then we'll filter on just SharePoint actions. So what did we say? We said we want a new item to be added to a SharePoint list. Let's see if they've got something along those lines. File, 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 discard. Let's see, we want create. There we go, create an item. So that's the one we want. So this is going to, when a new account gets created in Dataverse, we're now going to create an item in a SharePoint list. Well, where? What site are we going to create it in, and what list are we going to create in? Let's go add a new site for this. So we'll go to my Mad SharePoint site. This is the main SharePoint site that I use for my Mad SharePoint stuff. And now let's see, we need some place to store this data. So what I'd like to do is put it in its own site. So I'm going to create a subsite. We're going to come in here and go to my site contents, and then we're going to go create a new subsite to store this data. So we'll call this new accounts. So this will be a new subsite. New accounts. Give it a URL, give it a name. I guess this could have a space in it. And this is for new accounts from Dataverse. And what template do we want? If you're not familiar with SharePoint, it's kind of like with what we did with the flow, we get to pick different templates for our sites. I'm going to just keep the default one, the team site, not attached to a 365 group. I'll use the new experience. I could also choose the old classic experience, but I'll just use the new experience. Same permissions, that sounds good. Yep, let's create all that. So now, once this site gets created, I'll need to create a list in the site to store the notifications from Dataverse Flow. So we've got, this is our typical site. You've got typical things like a document library and whatever, but we're going to now add a list. So we'll come over here and we'll say, hey, let's add a list. And a couple different ways you could do that. You could click here to add an app, which will also allow me to add a list, or you could click here well, not there. Where is it? Where's the other way you can do it? If I go home here, so now I can click new list. And I just like to point this out because this one's always confusing. Here you click add an app, but that really means add an app or list. Over here, they actually in the new, so this is sort of the classic way of doing things. Here, they've actually specified list versus app, which I think is a little nicer. So we're going to do a new list, and we want to do a blank list, right? Because we don't need a whole lot of information here. This is going to be our um, um, accounts from Dataverse. I can call it whatever I want. New notifications. Showing site navigation sounds good. And then once we create that, notice by default you're going to get a title field, and that's the only field I get. And we could use that to store the account name, but there's probably some other information that we want to store when a new account gets created. In fact, let's go back to Power Apps for a second and see. Let's open up our data in a new tab here if I can. Let's just do it this way, Power Apps. So what kind of data do we have in our account entities at the moment? You got things like account name, phone number, city. So, and actually, let's make sure I'm in the right environment here. But I think, regardless of the actual data, we want to, those are some of the options that we want to see. We definitely want to see account name, and that's required, so we would always expect to see that. And I think phone number would be another good choice. So let's do that. Let's take our account name, we'll put that in title, and we'll take the phone number and create another column to capture the phone number. So back to our SharePoint list, let's add a column. We're going to add a single line of text, and we'll call this main phone. Right? Sounds good. Save. So the idea is that as people go into Dataverse and add accounts, we would expect to see them here. So our SharePoint folks will get those notifications. All right, so we've got our SharePoint site, we've got our SharePoint list. Let's go back to Power Apps and fill in that information. So it wants to know what site do we have. When we click in here, it's going to show us a list of existing sites, but you have to be careful because I just created that site, and I think, what did I call it? New accounts, something like that. It's not in the list, so I'll have to enter that in. That, or I'd have to go back out and come back in to get it to refresh. But I've got it handy. Right there it is. So let's grab that URL. Punch that in there. But now once I punch that in there, it is smart enough to go through, call SharePoint, call that site, and get a list of all the lists in the site. There's only one custom list that's available, accounts from Dataverse, so that's why that's showing up. So we'll go ahead and choose that. And then again, it's going to go out there, find out what columns are available. We only created two, the title, which was required, and we added a main phone. So now what we need to do is we need to tell the flow what information from Dataverse is going to be mapped to the title column in SharePoint, and what information from Dataverse is going to be mapped to the main phone. So for title, we said account name, and if we scroll down over here, you'll see there's a whole bunch of choices to choose from, but right at the top, there's the account name. That's what we want, so we'll choose that. And then for the main phone, we said we want a phone number. Now there's a whole bunch of choices here, so let's do a little bit of filtering like we were doing earlier and put phone and see what to choose from. So I see there's address 1 phone, address 3 phone. So, I could play a bit of, hey, let's pick one, try it, run it, see what works or not. But I've done that before and that gets old, So it's helpful if if you don't know, you can do the trial and error. But we already kind of got a sneak peek and we know that it's main phone. So we're going to go ahead and choose main phone. All right. That looks all filled out. That looks all filled out. Let's go ahead and save that. Once it's saved, check our flow checker. Everything looks good there. Let's go ahead and test it. We're going to say, we're going to put this in test mode. We're going to manually perform the trigger, and then we will see if it actually runs or not. So let's do that. Now let's go to our data entry. So we're back at Power Apps under the Dataverse, and we're going to just edit the data. And there's a couple different ways we could do that. So the first way we'll do it is just by adding a new record. So we'll come in here and we'll just add a new account. And this will be, we'll call this one the AAA account. So this is AAA, and their phone number is 111-111-1111. So when we go ahead and save that, that should cause the new account trigger to fire. And let's see how fast it is. Not that fast. We'll give this a second to think about it. Back over here to Power Apps. Click on it. So I went back to all my flows. I've only got one flow turned on here, the one we just created 59 seconds ago. We're going to go ahead and click on it. We'll get all the information about what the name of the flow was, who created the flow, whether or not it's on, the type of flow, how it's being billed, the different connections it's using. And if I scroll down here, you finally get whether it's run or not. And we've got that one run 11 seconds ago, and yay, it was successful. So we can click on that run, and then we can get details about the success or the non-success of that run. So it says it ran successfully. Let's go back in there one more time because there should be a little more information about it. There we go. So you can actually click on each step and get information about the inputs, the outputs, and some of the times the information actually displayed in what's called Json, JavaScript Object Notation, which is simply a way of storing attribute value pairs, right? The shipping method code is a 1. The follow email is true. So different types of that. Sometimes that's helpful, especially when things go wrong. It's helpful to see. I had a flow once where an email wasn't coming through, and I realized, and when I went to the JSON, the email was blank, and I was like, why? I was looking at the wrong email. So if we scroll down here, we get the same thing for the action. So that was the trigger up top. Here's the action, and you can see, oh, it went against this site. It went against this name. This was the information that was sent to it. So if this actually worked, we should be able to go to that site and look at that. There it is. That's the flow in action. Now our SharePoint folks can see whenever a new account gets created. Now, I demoed that using the Power Apps portal for entering a record, but there are other ways that you can enter data into Dataverse. So one of the ways, one of my favorite ways, is using Excel, because people love Excel, people know Excel. So if I click on this edit data in Excel, this is going to open up a temporary Excel spreadsheet that has the Dataverse add-in loaded and ready to go. So I'll go ahead and open that Excel spreadsheet, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So in the Excel spreadsheet, yes, I trust it. I created it. You'll see the add-in over here load, and if I've got single sign-on configured correctly, it'll automatically sign me in using my Mad SharePoint connector, and it does. If it hadn't for some reason, I would just go ahead and click sign in. It's going to load the data, refresh the data, and now I'm seeing all the accounts from my Dataverse and all my new, what we just added to AAA, right? So there's AAA there. Now, the great thing about this is people are used to, in Excel, working with read-only data, but this add-in allows us to do read and write. So if I want to add a record, I can click on new, and I can say, now we've got the BBB account, and if I go over, I think it's all the way at the end here. Just jump all the way to the end is where the main phone number is. So it's not the same as the form. The form was nice because it put the phone, all the pertinent information right up front. But in this one, it just kind of lists it out. And so the phone number is all the way at the end, I think. Oh, I went too far. Let's just find it. There it is. So this one will be 222, 222, 2222. And if I want to edit one, so let's see, what else do we have here? We've got 2 that I did earlier. Let's actually change those. Instead of Dave, we'll make them DEP 123 and DEP 456. So I can add additional records. I can edit existing records. And when I'm done, I simply say publish, and the add-in looks over my data set here, looks for any edits and inserts, and pushes them up. Look, successful workbook updated. So if we go and we check our flow, we should have another flow that was triggered, and that was what, from our new account, right? The edits are not going to trigger it. We're only triggering on new accounts. So this should be that new, what did I say, BBB? In fact, I saw it there in the in the JSON. There it is. So this was triggered by that new account in VBB, and this time it was done because I edited the Dataverse data using the Excel and the Excel added. I go over here, look at that. There's that new account. Now again, I'm not seeing the two changes. We didn't set the flow up, but I could go back and edit the flow and say now I want to look for any changes and additions and maybe even deletions, and then maybe add a column that says the type of change. So you could have a whole logging system built with this if you really wanted to keep track of all the changes that happen to the account. But again, just trying to demo and give you some ideas of the different things that you might be able to do. All right. So we talked about initiating the flow from Dataverse. We talked about the different triggers that are available. We talked about using, you know, when you're searching, you still at this point in time, we're still using the old terms, even though it's Dataverse. What else did we talk about? We talked about creating a new flow, looked at different entities. I didn't show you the custom entity, which is down here. So let me show you that real quick. If you jump out to data flow, you can actually create your own entities. You can come out here to your tables / entities, and you can say, you know what? This is all cool, but let's create my new table / entity. So maybe I've got one for just cats and I want to keep track of different cats that I'm. Notice that when I create this, it gives me, in fact, let me fix this. It actually gives me both a display name and a plural display name. It gives me a prefix to keep track of my custom tables versus standard tables. It gives me an opportunity to define a primary key. I can choose whether to enable attachments, meaning someone can attach a file to this new record. And there's a whole bunch of other settings that you can go through when you create these custom entities. So I'll go ahead and keep it simple and just create the cat entity. Notice it's got that name, its data type is text. It's actually generating, so you can see right here it was provisioning. Once it's been provisioned successfully, I get all the system metadata. So created by, created on, sequence number, all that other stuff. So the only custom metadata I created was this guy, and you can see it's designated by the prefix, but there's also a bunch of system metadata. Now I can add additional columns, right? So I want to add another column. Maybe I want to have an owner of the cat, right? Maybe the data type is, maybe the email of the owner, or if it's some maybe the phone number, whatever kind of, we'll do this. We'll keep this one text, make this optional. Maybe some cats don't have owners. I can add another column for the date of birth. That's probably going to be a date. Don't need the time. I don't know when. I just know what. I don't know what time of day. Just that what date. And again, I can make this optional, recommended, or required. And notice every time I do that, you're getting those additional customs. They're all prefixed with the different data types, data requirements, etc. All the metadata about them. Then I can go to my data tab. And I could do this in Excel too and start adding records, right? So let's go ahead and edit that data. And just like we did before, we're going to be able to, well, there's no existing data to edit, but if there was, we could edit the existing data. We could add new records, whatever we need to do. So we'll just add 3 records really quickly. You can see down there, it's doing all that. So we'll add, I got a cat named Joey. I've got another cat named Raj. And I've got a cat named Zeke. So there's my 3 cats. Let's go ahead and publish those cats. You can actually see some of the information being sent up as it syncs. Publish successful. Go back to our data flow, or Dataverse, I mean. Didn't I save all my changes? Let's just refresh. There we go. There's the 3 cats that we just added. So that's doing the custom entity. What else did we do? We showed you how to add new records, see the the flow run, and see the results in SharePoint. Exporting and importing a flow. Let's take a look at that. So once you have your flows, you might want to export them and import them to share with other folks. Now that does require a different set of licensing. So I'm going to switch to my main environment, my development environment doesn't have the licensing required to share. So if I switch over here to my Managed SharePoint and go to some of those flows, you can see this is where if I wanted to take one of these flows and send a copy to someone, I could do that. Email a copy. I could do a save as to make a copy here for, and then let someone and then share that with someone else, and they could work on the copy that I made. So a couple different options as you're working with your flows to provide someone else with a copy with their own copy to work with. All right. I talked a little bit about environments. I talked a little bit about the default environment and the developer environment, but there's also trial environments. This is where you can sign up for a trial and you can work on things. And the neat thing about a trial environment is that you can convert it to production. So you start off with a trial, you have access to everything, you're getting everything the way you like it. Now you're ready to deploy it and get everyone working on it. There's an option where you say, okay, deploy to production, and it moves it into production. So that's a really cool thing to do. As I mentioned, using the Power Apps community plan is a great way to get started. It's a free environment for individual use. It's not meant for production, but it helps you learn and develop your skills, explore and create things in a full featured environment, and build apps on a single extensible view of the Dataverse. It includes access to Power Apps, Microsoft Flow, the Dataverse, connectors, all sorts of other tools. If you're using Dynamics in the Dynamics Administration Center, that's where you can see some of those environments I talked about: production environments, development environments, trial environments, and you can work with them and move them around. You can back them up. You can promote them if necessary. Here's an example where I'm walking through creating a new sandbox environment. So a sandbox environment is kind of like a development environment where you can just it's a separate environment and you can try things out and do things there, but with more than one people. Remember, the development environment was for a single person. A sandbox environment is for more than one person. What are some tips and tricks? Watch out for some of those triggers that might be missing if you're not looking for the right term in technology. Sometimes you're not always finding what you're looking for. The flow checker is sometimes helpful. We saw in the beginning where we did one of those blank templates. The flow checker showed us some things that are wrong, but don't always count on the flow checker. Sometimes there may be something wrong, and the flow checker says there's no errors. So you got to be careful. The flow checker can be helpful, but it's not 100%. And the other thing is when you're working with flows that you shared with someone versus your own flows, they will move in the view. So when you're looking at your flows, you have my flows and you have team flows. And if you shared a flow, it will move to team flows. So sometimes I've worked on a flow and like, where'd it go? Oh, it's because I shared it with someone, and now it's a team flow. Some other tips and tricks. This is us walking through the announce new accounts. This is, I think, my backup slides. Be careful of the environment. That's what I wanted to point out. So again, if you're in a brand new environment, you may not have solutions found, right? You won't have solutions unless you create a database. So what I showed you, I had already created my new account and had already created a new database. In fact, I even loaded my database with sample data. But if you haven't done those steps, you may run into this where it says no solutions found. That's a fancy way of saying you've got to have a database, and you can go ahead and create that environment and create that database. You might need to do a trial to do that, so you might have to upgrade your plan depending on what kind of plan you signed up for. And again, I recommend starting out with the Power Apps community plan. It's a great way to get started and learn things. It's really simple. You go through, you sign up, didn't require a credit card or anything. The first time through, you'll have to go and you'll create a database. You'll specify your currency, your language, and then you again be careful. If you go too fast, you might get something like this. This is me being impatient, but don't worry. Hit refresh, give it time. Your database should be created just fine, and then you'll have access to all the standard entities and the flows and everything else I talked about. Another way of signing up for this is through the Office 365 Developer Program. They actually just renamed this to the M365 Developer Program. It's free. It allows you access to resources in Azure, downloads a bunch of tools, a little developer toolbox, a little 90-day Office 365 toolbox that includes the Power Apps Community Plan, some additional licenses, and even though it says it's only 90 days, if you're using it, Microsoft will renew this for you automatically. I've had one for years that I've been using for training, and they just every 90 days or every 120 days. For me, it's an older one, so it was on a 120-day cycle. They just send me an email saying, "Hey, you've been using it. By all means, keep using it. It's been renewed." And the sample packs are really, really cool to take advantage of to get you started with some data. So that's my talk. Hopefully you got a few nuggets out of it. Hopefully you know what Dataverse is, how you would use it, and why you want to use it. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. You can always tweet me at David E. Patrick on Twitter. Please follow me, and thanks for listening. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.